I'm not sure why that works, actually, but I'm glad it does.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Hi, Tom. Welcome back.
Thanks. I can't say that my time was better spent in the other meeting, and that's always sad. But I'm glad to be back. Sometimes you just do what you have to do.
You do have, oh, especially at the state. Oh my goodness.
We talk about data and stuff we're doing in criminal justice. State's doing a huge data push, upgrade, $29 million. So there's just a lot of things going on, and you get pulled in. But anyway, I'm glad.
That's good. Huh? If we could only be data driven all the time, that would be a wonderful thing.
I think there's some positive things trying to move forward. So hopefully.
Yeah. All right. So Lance answered Wally's kind of question, and that was a really interesting discussion. Did anyone else still have a thought on that vein? Okay. Leslie, did you get what you needed?
Yep, I think so. So I'll go forward and get that feedback, see what everybody has to say, and I will make sure to include you, Wally, as well. I definitely appreciate that. Cool.
Great.
Okay. All right. Well, if we're done with that one, then we have the very last item before other business, if anyone has something. So this must be Sarah, who was the intern, right? And super cool. Sarah, are you still an intern, or have you gone to some higher level of authority? Whatever the case, sounds like you rocked it in your work, helping.
Yeah, I was very lucky to be a data intern under Leslie's supervision over the summer. I'm back in school, so I'm a junior at the University of Utah. So I'm in classes this semester and working. So no internship for me for right now, but I really enjoyed my time over the summer.
Thank you for coming back. My goodness, hopefully you have a paper you can brag about what you've just done while you're still in school. Good job.
All right.
So you're presenting on public defense caseload and pay analysis, yes?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to see if I can get my screen share working. Okay, perfect. And I'll just kind of get into this. That discussion was a really great introduction to kind of the topic of this presentation. So I'm going to kind of just get into things. So this is a presentation I gave, I think in August at the end of my internship. And this is just kind of an accumulation of a bunch of data analysis that me and Leslie did together over the summer. And kind of what this analysis is focusing around. It's grounded in these core principle 8B and 8D from the IDC mission, which focuses on appropriate caseloads and proper compensation. So that's going to kind of be the topic of analysis for today. So we've talked a little bit about, kind of where we're at with that. And one of the things that I talked about over the summer, I connected this back to the Sixth Amendment Center's analysis of the Utah Indigent Defense System and their right to counsel in Utah assessment in 2015. Back in that assessment, they came to the conclusion that at least 35% of Utah's defense attorney contracts had excessive caseloads. Based on our data analysis, we believe that's probably a pretty low estimate. And we also know that based on the flat fee contract system, that there's kind of this negative incentive where attorneys are hurt financially the more time they put into client cases, which can be a difficult barrier when that is when that's combined with excessive caseloads. So the purpose of this presentation, again, is just to provide some graphics and analysis to support an argument for the necessity of your work at the IDC, and then also to provide a statistical description of how Utah is doing with public defense as of right now. So what's going to be included in this analysis, we're going to start with kind of a data background. This will go pretty quick because we did go over the standards already. We'll have a section on appropriate caseloads, followed by a section on proper compensation. I'll draw some key takeaways, and then that will be the end of the presentation. Okay, so we kind of use two main data resources to do this analysis over the summer. Our really important data resource was a survey sent out in January 2021 by Leslie. The survey asked attorneys to share information about their caseloads by court and the percentage of their working time spent on those caseloads. We got responses from 17 of 29 counties. That doesn't mean we got 100% response rates from any of the counties, but we did get representation from quite a few counties. And this data, we want to mention kind of a caveat because everything's self-reported. Everything's subject to human error, but we do think it's a good estimate of where caseloads are at. And reported caseloads were also, they were asked to report over a 6-month period. So we doubled the caseload numbers to match the full year flat fee contracts to have kind of that compensation as well as caseload matchup. So as I kind of mentioned, the other piece of our data, or the other data resource that we used is the 2020-21 grantee contracts. And we just use this to get data on the type and amount of financial compensation the attorneys who responded to the survey received in the time period of the survey. And we only included attorneys with flat fee contracts. There were a few that responded that had contracts that were hourly, and those were taken out of our data set for just to make things a little bit more clean. So this is what we've been talking about in order to do this analysis and kind of gauge, whether a caseload is appropriate or excessive. Our 2 standards that we had access to were the 1973 National Advisory Committee standards and our RAND standards from 2019. So neither of these is exactly right. As we've kind of been talking about 1973, we're going to think about as kind of our bare minimum. And then our RAND standards are maybe going to serve as our ideal, probably a little bit higher than what is realistic for attorneys. But each of these standards holds a suggested hours per case, and then suggested cases per year for a full-time attorney. And then other metrics we use throughout the analysis, we have a standard of 1,800 hours per year that comes up every once in a while. This competes to an average of 40 hours per week minus paid time off. We also used in a couple different places a standard of $75 per hour for public defense attorneys. This translates to $135,000 in a year, which accounts for salary, benefits, and overhead. So that's kind of serving as our baseline, just kind of starting point for what we would guess an appropriate hourly pay would be. So that will come back later. But for right now, we're going to start with the first section on appropriate caseloads. Obviously, the goal for caseloads is to allow attorneys a satisfactory amount of time to be able to put into each of their cases in their contract. From the right to counsel assessment, we know that when there are excessive caseloads in a contract, attorneys are more likely to encourage clients to accept plea deals, and they have less time to spend per client. Both of these things aren't ideal in giving clients appropriate representation. So keeping that in mind, we're going to get into our first analysis. We're going to have 3 graphs that we'll look at in this section, and then we'll get into proper compensation. So starting with kind of a zoomed out, uncomplicated look, how we're doing with reasonable caseloads. We're going to kind of break down this graph by looking at Davis County. I think you can all see my mouse. So right here, this is going to be Davis County. 4th from the left, we have all the counties listed on the x-axis. If you couldn't see me moving my mouse around, Davis is just 4th from the left. So the height of this bar is going to represent the number of contracts that we received survey responses for from Davis County. So we can see from Davis, we have 14 contracts that we received information from our survey. And so what this graph is showing us, we have kind of these 3 different colors that are coded on each of the bars. Looking at Davis, we have 1 bar that's coded, or 1 kind of square that's coded in blue. This is showing us that we have 1 of the 14 contracts in Davis County that is under our RAND limit for the number of cases that an attorney should have within a year. So Davis County, we have 1 under kind of our ideal, maybe outside of the realm of reality standard here. And then we have 7 that are in our orange category, which shows the number of cases that are over our RAND standard. And then we have 6 contracts in Davis County that are over our 1973 standard, which is serving as our bare minimum. So as we look across the graph here, we can see that we have 45% of contracts in Utah are above the, or I should say 45% of our survey respondents had contracts that were above the 1973 standards or a bare minimum for the number of cases that they should be working within a year. And then we had 80% of the contracts were above our RAND standard. This analysis was done on an individual level, and it was extrapolated based on the percentage of time attorneys reported they were spending on their contracts. So if an attorney, for example, worked 90% of the time instead of 100% of their time on a certain contract, we did take that into account. However, we still have a lot of orange and red on this graph. And from our 2015 Right to Counsel analysis, we know that 46% of Utah attorneys hold 3 or more contracts. So having multiple contracts that are what we would call excessive can lead to an especially excessive caseload, I guess you could say. So coming into our next graph, the colors should be familiar. They're showing, this graph is showing kind of similar things, but we're going to change the interpretation slightly. So our units here, instead of case numbers within contracts, is going to be case hours. So we're going to kind of use the other half of the RAND in 1973 standards. So starting again with Davis County, that's going to be over here. We're going to look at this blue dot. The blue dot represents an estimated total amount of hours that attorneys in Davis are putting into their contracts. So for those 14 contracts, we added up the total amount of time by multiplying our 1,800 hours per year, which is kind of our standard for a full-time attorney, multiplied by the percentage of time that they reported working on the contract. So this is that total. Again, this is like an estimate of how many hours attorneys in Davis County are putting into their contracts. So above this blue dot, we have our red dot, which is representing our 1973 standards. The way we got the height of that bubble is just the 1973 standard hours per case multiplied by the number of cases in Davis County. So across the board here, when you're seeing red dots, these are if attorneys were following, to a T, the 1973 recommended hours per case, that would be how many hours they were spending on their caseload for their contracts. So this is the total for Davis County. And then way up here, we have our orange bubble, which is representing the same thing. The RAND standard recommended hours per case multiplied by the number of cases. And this is taking into account, again, the type of case. And these are all sums for each of the counties that we had data for. So as we're kind of looking across this one again, in some counties, we're seeing our blue dots or kind of our estimated total number of hours that are currently being put into contracts are below our bare minimum. So we're seeing that in a few different places, like in San Pete. Most of the time we're seeing our blue dots and our red dots, which is our 1973 standards, are much closer together than our red dots and our blue dots and our orange dots. So we're closer to the bare minimum than we are to kind of our ideal RAND standard situation. So coming into our last graph, we kind of break out this caseload discussion by court. So in this analysis, you're going to see on the left of this graph, we have different courts that are listed here. So our district court is up here on the top in red, and then we have our justice court in blue, juvenile, and then parent or a child welfare court. And the reason why we decided to include this graph, there's kind of one really important observation we want to make here, but let me explain just really quickly how to understand what's going on. This is a pretty simple, once again, this is a case number graph. So each of the bubbles is representing a contract. If you look at Davis County, we have 14 contracts included in our data set. You should be seeing more than 14 bubbles. I think this is about 21 bubbles that are included here. That's because some of the contracts have cases in multiple courts. So they're gonna be doubled or tripled depending on how many courts were included in the contract. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The height of these bubbles is just going to be the estimated number of hours that's being spent, the number of cases in the contract. And then these horizontal lines, our thin line is going to be our bare minimum, which is our 1973 standard, and our thicker lines are going to be our RAND standard or our ideal. So across kind of this whole thing, most of our bubbles are beneath both of these standards for the cases. And the place where that's not true is up here with our district court cases. So if we're going to kind of pin down a place where a lot of our excessive caseloads is coming from, we would estimate based on this graph that a lot of excessive caseloads are coming from district court. So a couple of observations to make here. 74% of district attorney contracts are above the RAND caseload recommendations. It's important to remember as well that 44% of contracts have at least one case in more than one court, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this one. And then of the attorneys with district contracts over the RAND recommended caseload, we also have 30% of those have at least one case in another court. So these standards are assuming that attorneys are only spending their time on district court cases. So if you have an excessive caseload in one court, but you also have cases in another court, once again, that's a place where you're going to kind of have extra excessive caseloads because of kind of these compounding problems. So moving into our next section, we're going to talk about proper compensation. Just some important things to remember here. The importance of proper compensation is to attract qualified applicants and to incentivize effective representation. So we're going to kind of move into our first analysis and not worry too much about the rest of this. This first analysis is pretty straightforward. Once again, this is just an hourly pay by county. So along the x-axis, you're going to see our county names again. So we can see Davis, once again, has 14 bubbles, one bubble for each contract. The way we calculate the height of each of these bubbles is just an estimated hourly pay. So we have the contract payment, the flat fee, divided by the total individual hours that we estimated based on the percentage of time that attorneys reported that they were working on their contracts. So based on this estimated hourly pay, we have 77% of these contracts below the $75 per hour line. So if you remember, we kind of kept $75 per hour as our kind of a good guess at what would be an appropriate hourly pay were attorneys paid hourly. And we have a good majority of our attorney contracts are below this line. We have also highlighted in red managing defender contracts that were reported in our survey, and we have 4 of the 8 contracts are also below that $75 per hour line, which is not ideal. Moving into our next graph, this one might be the most difficult to explain, but it does have a really logical interpretation. So stick with me just for a minute. Coming back again to Davis County, we'll kind of stick with that. That's a little bit easier. This is, again, hopefully a familiar color scheme as well. Blue is going to represent the total annual amount that Davis County is paying their attorneys for the contracts that we received data for. So this is the blue dot's pretty simple across the board. It's just the sum of the flat fees on the contracts that we have data for. And then coming into our red dot, which is representing our 1973 standard, the way we calculated this, it's just the $75 per hour that we've been talking about, $75 times the 1973 standard hours times the number of cases. So what this means is this is just kind of the 1973 recommended pay for the amount of cases that are in the contracts in Davis County. And then this is, again, up here with the orange dot, our RAND standards. This is the hypothetical, how much Davis County should be paying the contracts based on how many hours RAND suggests should be put towards the number of cases in the contracts in Davis County. So now that we kind of have that interpretation set up, we can kind of look across here. Once again, we're seeing most of our blue dots are kind of our reality in each of these counties is much closer to our bare minimum, sometimes below our bare minimum, depending on the county. And then our RAND standards, which we know are a little bit high. However, they are much higher than our blue dot in most cases. Okay, so our last two graphs are, I think, my favorite from this presentation. We're going to talk about just very quickly annual pay deficits. So what this graph is showing, we have bubbles again for each contract in each county, and how we got the placement along the y-axis of each of these bubbles is just the annual pay. So the contract, the flat fee contract, minus the 1973 standardized annual pay. So this is the same number that we would have been using in this graph. So 1973 standard hours per case multiplied by the $75 per hour, and then again by the number of cases within the contract. So here we're showing kind of the deficit. If we're above the line, you're paying more than 1973 says would be necessary to pay for the number of contracts. And then below the line is where we kind of get that deficit of we're paying less than what 1973 would suggest. So we've got on this graph, 32% of our contracts from our data set are being underpaid according to our bare minimum 1973 standards. And this is really interesting as we move into our RAND version of this graph. We have 82% of our contracts in this graph are below our RAND suggested amount that should be paid based on the RAND standard hours per case. And as you kind of look a little bit closer at this graph, the first tick is $100,000. So even the contracts that are just a little bit below this deficit line are being underpaid, what I would say is probably in a pretty significant way. And then if we look at some of these worst cases, this bottom bubble right here is Sean Condi, who reported to have 538 cases, district cases, and was being compensated $74,000 for that work. So, you know, we have the takeaway here isn't that Sean Condi should be getting paid almost $800,000 more dollars. But kind of the takeaway here is that his caseload is so excessive that he's, according to RAND standards, doing essentially the work of 6 full-time attorneys. So once again, we know the RAND standards are kind of a high estimate for what attorneys should be doing within a year, but 6 full-time attorneys is, yeah, not great by any standard. So our key takeaways from this presentation, kind of going back over some of the main statistics we got from this analysis, 45% of contracts were above the 1973 standards. 80% of the contracts caseloads were above the RAND standards from our very first bar graph that we looked at. 74% of district court caseloads within contracts are above the RAND recommended caseloads for an entire year. That was another one of our big takeaways from the caseload portion. And then within compensation, we know that 77% of contracts pay less than $75 per hour. 32% are underpaid according to 1973 hourly pay, and 82% are underpaid according to our estimated RAND hourly pay. So overall, our takeaways from this analysis is just simply that Utah indigent defense attorneys are in general overworked and underpaid. There's a lot of work to be done. And at this point, I would be happy to answer any questions that you had that may have come up during that presentation. But thank you so much for your time. It's been really exciting to be here listening to all of your conversations. So this is something I'm really passionate about, and I was so glad to be able to come back and talk about it one more time.
Sarah, thank you. That's a lot of data and a lot of work. Good for you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
What are the questions from the group? Or comments?
I would have a question. How would you think your study looked if you used the numbers that Lance was talking about?
That's definitely something I was thinking about while we were kind of having that conversation before this presentation. Obviously, it would be probably a lot lower than our RAND standards are recommending. Back when I was doing this analysis, our RAND standard we thought maybe would be reasonable, but probably a little bit too high. And after kind of hearing that conversation, our RAND standards are more than likely kind of outside of the realm of reality for what should be expected of public defenders. But so somewhere between, I think that a little bit closer to our RAND standard is going to be kind of that sweet point than our 1973 standards. From what I understand, those 1973 standards are way below what we should be expecting our attorneys to be able to do in a year.
You'd still find a significant deficit in pay for work done.
Yeah, certainly. I think that, you know, these both kind of served as, you know, kind of a minimum and maximum in a way. And, you know, looking at how much of our data or how many of our contracts are kind of below our RAND standards and even below our 1973 standards, I think it just goes to show that there's definitely a problem with excessive caseloads in Utah, even if we're using standards that are completely out of date. So
this may be an unimportant comparison, but I'm just wondering if the district attorney's office has any sort of data on how many felony cases each of their assistant district attorneys have, and also what their pay scale is. I believe that, I don't know about how their caseload compares to Richie's office, the Salt Lake Legal Defender Office, but I bet that the legal defenders have much higher caseload, and I know that their pay scale there is not parity with the district attorney's office. And, you know, in the same way that the county attorney receives their money from the county, and Richie has to get his money from the county, there ought to be parity, but there isn't. Do you know if the district attorney's office has any sort of data that we can compare?
So I will jump in and answer this if you don't mind, Sarah. I do know Salt Lake County is not in Sarah's analysis because they are not hourly. And so they're one of the few that have those full-time attorneys, and so it's slightly different. But in Salt Lake County, I know that LDA has been arguing for that with some success to Salt Lake County to make parity. So I know Salt Lake County has been working to fund the defenders more equally on a level with prosecutors. I have also heard that the DA's office is probably slightly underfunded. So it's not always good to just compare yourself to the DA because their funding might not be appropriate either. In terms of cases on the two of them, it sounds like hopefully that might be Hannah's new area of expertise. And then I think when it comes down to us, it's figuring out how do we make those same comparisons in rural counties where that information is, no matter what, a lot less available than it is in Salt Lake County. Like Salt Lake County is our easy one when it comes to figuring this out. The rest of these counties are a lot more difficult.
Right.
This, Tom, I just wanted to say, I think that the presentation that you put together, you know, the information graphs, you guys have done a great job. It's definitely impressive. I can tell you from, law enforcement's found themselves in similar spots. There's these national standards. You'll hear chiefs or sheriffs talk about, well, by national standards, we should have 2 officers per 1,000 population. And city officials, I'm assuming county officials, don't like it much better. They don't like those. And they tend to shut a lot of that out because they see it as, how busy are you compared to last year or the year before, you know, versus how we stack up to some national number. So I do agree somewhat with the comment that was just made about the best. I think the one, if I was a purse string holder, the argument that would carry the most with me would be how how can we justify paying prosecutors this amount of money and defense this amount of money that's less if they're doing the same type amount of work? I think that would, because that gets more into, we don't think your value is, that's a harder public conversation to have, I think. So if there's, and that may be hard to get, I think that's probably what you were referring a little bit to is, it's not so easy to go find out maybe what every, county prosecutor, they have budgets, but those budgets may encompass more than, or they do encompass more, but I don't know, Lorraine, I just think that a lot of, from conversations I've had for years fighting this law enforcement issue on pay, these national numbers don't carry a lot of weight. It's showing what's happening with your neighbor, or with, in this case, I think the prosecution side versus defense, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you spoke up, Tom, and you have a sense for lots of different counties when it comes to law enforcement and other things. And I know in the Utah Association of Counties conference that was in May, first one back in person, and that's when we had a panel with 4 different people from the IDC world sharing with commissioners at that conference. I remember that one of the managing defenders who was there speaking in the panel, he said, because someone asked the question, a commissioner asked the question, there are a bunch of commissioners trying to learn, how this works, especially all the rurals. And he said, the question was, should there be equal spending for prosecution and defense? And I was so interested in the answer because I've never really examined the comparison, and that managing defender said, well, you would think so. Constitutionally, like you say, there's a lot of other perhaps things in the county attorney's offices that are part of that budget, but very interesting question and very interesting answer. Yeah. And I'll just reiterate that there's such differences among counties, and commissioners who are ultimately the ones to approve a budget. They're not the budget officers. Other electeds are budget officers to work on it, the finance people, the auditor, the elected auditors. But it's a problem in our state that we don't have commissioners, and I even here in Davis County, who have a full understanding of public defense. And so, for example, in Davis County, even though we've had a managing defender, from what I understand, since 2014, that person doesn't report to commissioners. It's not, necessarily educating commissioners. The fact that I started to learn about this was a very interesting story I should share someday. Yeah, it happened organically. All right, so time expires again in 6 minutes. Was there any other question on that topic? Okay.
If there's not a question, I just do want to thank Sarah once more for being such a phenomenal intern this summer. And if any of you need a data person that we might lose to law school and not do data work, highly recommend Sarah. But she also has 2 years left to finish college, so you can't hire her yet.
Yeah,
like other people, Sarah, I want to say your presentation was fantastic, and you spoke very rapidly, covering a lot of, at least for us, data that I'm not familiar with. And it was a great presentation. It was very, very organized. Terrific.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was a really awesome opportunity to come and share that with you. So thank you for listening.
Well, the fact that almost everybody is still in here and that we've had a lot of data, you guys want the data, and we need the data. So looks like Greg put up a hand. Is that a clapping hand or a question hand?
I think it's applause.
It was applause. Okay, good. I've never seen the applause hand be used. That was a cool one.
Sarah, are you in addition to a very clever college student that understands data, are you a priest? You seem to have a priest collar.
Yeah. I just have a little sweater on under my blazer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were wearing a lady of the robe
Oh, no.
of the cloth.
I mean, she seems to have multiple talents for sure. And I know a priest family, and you kind of look like that family. So that's another question for another time. Very, very nice. Yeah, we can't thank you enough, honestly. So Leslie was lucky to find you, or vice versa. Good.
Hey, Sarah, just real quick, this is Tom. When you finish up, definitely come knock on our door at CCJJ. You know, data's a big part of what we do. It's becoming a bigger part, and hopefully we're going to be growing it more. And yeah, I'd love to talk and see if there's something available.
Well, Tom, I
Thank
was going
you.
to say the same thing about Davis County. So depending on where you live, Sarah, you may have options.
Sarah, don't go over to the dark side. Stay on the defense side.
Well, one of the things that Sarah's study brought up in my mind is anybody watching the case flow going to one lawyer? It was like 570 cases.
Yeah.
How does that happen is the question that I had naively. Maybe Wally or Rich knows the answer to that, but
No, I don't know.
I mean, I do think this is some of what Jenny and Lance are dealing with. Unless it's managed and observed in the way that they do it, these things just kind of flow through.
We're watching it. We're watching it, Michael.
Yeah, no, it does seem like you are. For sure you are. That's why we need managing defenders, right? And data. I mean, I'm happy to say that the Davis County now participates in the grant, and I'm happy to say that defender data, that's why we actually needed another admin and a analyst. So we're still working through the rest of the county budget, but I think we're heading in a good direction. Okay, so we have like just under 2 minutes. So let's see. Adam will discuss this more with strategic planning. Good thing to come back to. Yes. And he let us know it's 2 minutes. If there aren't any other questions from commissioners, I mean, I know we can go all the way to 4, but we don't do that when we don't need to. Is there anything to be brought up as other business by anyone?
I'm interested in knowing what we're going to do, if anything, about Duchesne, the outlier Duchesne County. But we don't have to talk about it today, but I'm still interested in knowing how we're going to attack that problem of turning us down.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, why don't we add that to the agenda for next commission meeting, and then we can, I can try to coordinate between the commissioners between now and then.
That's a great idea, Matt. Wally,
Yeah.
good question.
I mentioned to Matt that on our JRI road tour, I had a fairly long conversation with Commissioner Hanson after, and some of her perspectives. So yeah, we can talk about that and then strategize on maybe ways to go back. And Matt and I mentioned to Matt that I'd like to talk to him about it. I haven't had that opportunity yet, but so that could be a good conversation, and hopefully Matt and I can connect before then.
Commissioner, we need to make a motion to adjourn. We have less than a minute. We don't want to all join again, I think.
I
Okay,
move
no.
we adjourn.
And November 18th is the next meeting. It's been fascinating to be with you 3 different times in less than 2 hours. Thank you all.
All in favor, right?
Did it. All in favor? Aye. Yes.
Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. See you.